One thing I've realized in just interacting with so many people is that we only look at insulin resistance if we have an obesity issue or we're struggling to lose weight or we've been given a diabetes diagnosis. But there are a lot of other signs that we are insulin resistant. To help our listeners understand, like, what are some of the other signs? Like, one time somebody brought to my attention and I was like, oh, I'd never even thought about this. If you can't go without food, you're metabolically unflexible, that those mitochondria are struggling. And that could be a precursor to you being insulin resistant. That might be the first sign. How do you feel on that?
Yeah, that's great. I love that you're bringing this up. Context, if we're saying 88% of all adults in the US have some form of insulin resistance, well, then there is a gap there because only about 60% are overweight or obese. So we have a portion of the population that don't fall into the overweight or obese category by current standards, but yet still would be failing some aspects of metabolic health. So how do we explain those two? Or what might be the less obvious signs of insulin resistance, to your point, rather than just I have too much fat that I'm jiggling or pinching? One, that's a great one. If someone can't fast for 12 hours, that's a terrible sign. And in a way, probably reflects insulin resistance and chronically elevated insulin, which always comes with insulin resistance. And if insulin is high, good luck burning fat for fuel. And that creates a problem with the person who's fasting, because if your insulin is high, because you're insulin resistant, even when you're fasting, it's still going to be higher than ideal. And when insulin is high, you are in glucose or sugar burning mode, and the body runs out of sugar very quickly. And so if you can't go 12 hours with, and you're an adult as a fast, that's a problem. You need to wean yourself off of that starch and sugar and help your body learn to burn fat better. And then it's nourished and it senses it has energy because you're using your own fat for energy, which after all is why it's there. That can only happen when insulin is down.
Sugar's worse, or do you think the bad fats are worse?
Oh my goodness. This, of course, you being who you are, the debate that's raging on this topic, most especially on social media. I don't want to answer that definitively, but maybe let me just talk through it for just a minute and put some context here, and maybe that'll lead me to a conclusion. So I do tend to fall on the insulin side of things. I think chronically elevated insulin is so clearly pathogenic, creating insulin resistance and all the problems that come from it, that it's very hard for me to say that refined starches and sugars aren't important. In fact, I have to just tip that way simply because my scientific expertise is so strong that I know the data so well that I just have to say that. However, I acknowledge that there is robust data suggesting that high levels of linoleic acid consumption are also very pathogenic. I just don't do those kinds of studies myself, and I'm not as familiar with the research. So I have to fall on the refined carb side. But in the end, I think we're splitting hairs because the fact is we're getting both. I think if you remove one and the other, or if you remove one, you've essentially removed the other. Because when people are getting high refined starches, they're getting them from processed foods that are high refined oils. When someone's getting high refined oils, it's not that they're drinking a bottle of soybean oil. They're getting the foods that the soybean oil has been cooked in, which is always going to be a refined starch or sugar. So in reality, we get them together and there's really no pulling them apart. But if I had to pick one, just because I'm so much more familiar with the science, that I would have to just say, well, the refined starches are going to be a huge problem.
No, well said. You're the insulin resistance specialist here.
That's right. I'm the carb insulin.
I love it. And you know what I always tell people is if I came into your house and I swapped out all your oils, I just poured the good oils in the bad oil bottles, you probably wouldn't even notice a difference in taste. So I do feel like some people are very insulin resistant. If they can't get that sugar craving under control, if we just start by swapping out their fats, we at least have a door in.
Yeah, in fact, but even then, Mindy, I think it's genius. The moment we say that, though, we're also immediately forcing them to toss out all the refined foods they're eating, which is such a culprit. Because if we're just talking about replacing their cooking oils, which would be huge, it would be huge, because it's not like these people are getting their carbs because they're making cake at home. They're eating, they're getting their treats from these stores. And so there's, in reality, there's just no pulling the two apart. But I like your sentiment. If we could just say, you know what, just use that olive oil or use that coconut oil instead. Yeah, but they're not cooking at home. They're eating, most of that stuff is coming from outside the home anyway.